What if you could develop the skills to manage intrusive IBS symptoms in only 10 minutes per day? Mahana is a new app that's making proven IBS treatment accessible to everyone who needs it. Discover the connection between your gut, your brain, and your behaviors, and develop new skills that can reduce the impact of IBS. Mahana is FDA cleared and is proven to reduce the severity of IBS symptoms. Get started today and download the app at mahanatx.com/thegutshow. Can gut health impact mental health? The short answer is yes, but the long answer is going to be covered in today's episode. So before we get into gut health and mental health, it's important to establish why this connection can even happen. And that's because of the gut-brain connection. So this connection is also called the HPA axis, and this is a bidirectional communication pathway between the central nervous system located in the brain and the enteric nervous system located in the gut. This all happens alongside the vagus nerve, which is the longest cranial nerve in your body. In addition to what we know about the gut-brain axis and gut-brain communication, there's also a new kind of proposed microbiota gut-brain axis to include the role of the gut microbiome, not only as part of the gut side of the communication pathway, but also kind of on its own, and how there might be a three-way connection going on. As we talk today, I'm including the gut microbiome and the role of microbes in the gut, but know that you may see this term referred to or through research or through even online searches, and that's what that is referring to. So kind of explaining a bit more of this communication, because it's bidirectional, there are impacts on the brain from things that happen in the gut, and there are impacts on the gut from things that are happening in the brain. And that's likely due to the fact that these nervous systems are mimickers of one another. So the enteric nervous system is like a smaller central nervous system. It has the same makeup of like neurons and communicators and all of these different pieces, but it's a smaller version of our central nervous system, which is kind of our main like system in the body. So kind of communication system. It's controlling what all is going on and how things are functioning. Since these do mimic one another, they can work together, but they can also work independently of one another. And that's why the gut got that nickname, the second brain, that you hear it referred to often. That's not because it's powerful or anything like that. It's because it really is like a second version of this central nervous system, which is fascinating. And so I'm going to talk a little bit about what can happen from the brain side as well as the gut side to show how these things can impact one another. And then we'll also get into more about mental health and gut health and kind of that next level, because the communication is more this foundational piece, but the health of each and how they can impact changes in the other, that's kind of the second layer, and how this communication may go wrong, or because this communication pathway is set up, there may be connections that aren't really meant to be connected, or ideal in an ideal world, maybe they wouldn't be as connected. And so we'll go over all those details. So whenever you activate the HPA axis during like psychological stress or physical stress, we know that this can alter the composition of your gut microbiota and increase gut permeability. Now, what that means is when we alter the makeup of your gut microbiota and your gut microbiome, this can lead to an unideal balance of beneficial and not so beneficial microbes, or just low quantities of everything overall. We refer to that as dysbiosis. And dysbiosis of the gut microbiome is one of the biggest markers of an unhealthy gut. We see this with those with chronic conditions like IBS, and even in things like IBD, inflammatory bowel disease. And we also see it with having kind of long-term impacts of visceral hypersensitivity and gut permeability and issues like that. Now, gut permeability, because not only is this makeup of bacteria that's becoming altered going to increase gut permeability, but even the stress itself can increase gut permeability. Now, gut permeability is how permeable, or how strong, or leaky is the best word because I think it's the one that everyone's familiar with. That's how much things can get between that gut wall with the body. So your gut wall and your gut lining is meant to protect what's in your actual body from the things that are coming in from the outside environment as you eat, drink, breathe, whatever you're doing. And so what we want in an ideal gut state, or an ideal gut wall state, is we want your body to be able to let in like the nutrients, the water, the things it actually wants to come into the body, but also keep out the things that we don't want and we want to keep out. That is what we want, and that's ideal. Now, if the gut can become more permeable, so either the tight junction proteins that are linking together, like kind of like the Red Rover game that we played as kids, or like a chain. If those become less tight, then that's going to create space. But this can also happen from the like mucus layer of the gut can kind of get degraded, and even the makeup of bacteria, like they kind of lose their strength and their guard a bit. And so that makes the gut less strong, less tight, less secure, which leads to more permeability. Now, there is a lot of talk about leaky gut, right? That's something that's a hot topic online. What we know about gut permeability is that this is not a condition. This is not a diagnosis. Like if you have leakiness in your gut or more permeability, that is not a diagnosis. That is a state that can change day to day. You can become more permeable and less permeable. And so what we want to think about is what are some of the contributors to more permeability, and how can we address those and be aware of those and utilize those in practice. And then we have some more science that's being done on measuring permeability, but right now we don't really have that information available to us. So bringing that back together, right, activating the HPA axis through stress, whether psychological, physical, any kind of stress that's happening, that is happening from the brain. We have the stress response, and it's the activation of the sympathetic nervous system. When that is happening, the HPA axis is activated, and then the gut is impacted by more dysbiosis and increased gut permeability. These are both key factors in IBS and other digestive disorders, as well as digestion symptoms. And so that's something we have to be aware of and might play a role in maybe not the exact cause of these conditions, because we have ruled out stress as an actual cause of IBS, but it can contribute to the symptoms at play and shouldn't be something that's ignored. Now, changes in the gut microbiota, so we're going in reverse, that dysbiosis makeup and gut permeability have also been linked to the development of depression and anxiety due to the altered communication along the HPA axis. So that's interesting, because not only is stress and what's happening with the stress response impacting the gut, but that impact it's having, or other things that are also causing that impact, that is contributing to anxiety and depression and changes in mood, which can then worsen stress and perceived stress, and then kind of create this cycle. What also can happen is chronic inflammation. Now, with inflammation, that is likely due to the gut permeability piece, because if things are coming into the body that aren't meant to, there is going to be some low-grade inflammation as the body's kind of responding to that, right? And that's probably what's happening. And we're going to get more into that, which is really interesting in how that inflammation then changes the brain. But when your body is in a state of inflammation, that increases stress in the body, because it's not something that our bodies are not meant to function in a state of chronic inflammation. That's why metabolic disease and different disease states can happen from inflammation. It's because our bodies are not meant to function there. And so a lot of the processes in the body start to shift, and that stress response might be more activated. So that is what we refer to as this gut-brain cycle that we see with those with IBS, we see with those with other digestive disorders. And it's somewhere where people can really get stuck and start to spiral really quickly. Now, research has shown that exposure to stress early in life, so like childhood stress, childhood traumas, whatever it may be, can actually increase susceptibility to stress long-term, because the HPA axis becomes what they call abnormal. And that also can put an individual at risk for kind of this chronic gut dysbiosis and IBS. So this part is something that still needs to be explored more. It is new. It's not like it's robust research yet. But what that shows me is that we have to be aware of the holistic view of someone's life, right? If you had a lot of stress in childhood, whether that be actual, like true traumas that you were going through, or the family that you were raised in, or whatever it may be, what childhood looked like, you may be more susceptible to stress. So you might be more susceptible to the stress gut cycle. And you may also, because of that stress in childhood, when the gut microbiome makeup is really developed, like that happens in early childhood development, where like your like ideal kind of fail safe standard, what do you call it? We restart something, right? Reboot it, like it kind of goes back to those preset settings that is developed in childhood. And so if you have early childhood stress and chronic stress in childhood, when you're developing this makeup of bacteria, and then if you add on to that different lifestyle and diet behaviors that might have also contributed to more dysbiosis, then that's something that you're probably going to be working against in adulthood, and something that it's just helpful to be aware of, because it'll help us understand you better and understand how we might be addressing everything that's going on.
Did you know that you can access evidence-based IBS treatment on your phone? Mahana is an app developed by gastroenterology and psychology specialists that teaches the skills to manage IBS and decrease symptom severity in as little as 10 minutes per day. A clinical trial showed that nearly 2 out of 3 IBS patients who used Mahana reported improvement in IBS symptom severity. Mahana IBS gives you the tools to self-manage symptoms and develop strategies to live a fuller life with IBS. Get started now and download the app at mahanatx.com/thegutshow. Now back to today's episode.
So in reverse, your gut bacteria, so those microbes living in your gut, they can actually produce brain chemicals alongside the HPA axis called neurotransmitters, which you've probably heard of before. They're some of the main communicators from the brain. Your microbes are also producing neurotransmitters, specifically dopamine, norepinephrine, GABA, and the precursors to serotonin. And we're going to talk about that a bit more, but most of the serotonin is produced in the gut. And so what that is saying is that if we have alterations or changes in these neurotransmitters and how they're produced and how they're kind of their activity and what they're doing in the body, this can directly impact how you feel. So these neurotransmitters are not only just communicating, but they can alter mood. And so for those with IBS specifically, or other digestive disorders like IBS, this means that gut dysbiosis may be leading to some of those feelings of anxiety and or depression, stress, altered mood, any of those things. Now, it's very hard to measure this again, right? The science is still coming and there's still a lot to understand. So that's not going to be true of every single person, but it can explain why those who are dealing with digestive disorders not only are experiencing stress and changes in mood because of the quality of life and what they're dealing with, but it might explain why they might be even more susceptible to that, and why mood might be something that feels more up and down and feels like something you're kind of working against. And again, brings you back to that cycle and that feeling stuck kind of place, right? We also know that your gut bacteria not only produce neurotransmitters, but they can also produce short-chain fatty acids. And that includes butyrate, propionate, and acetate. Now, these can affect brain function, which is interesting. So the short-chain fatty acids are more so involved in other processes in the body, but they can also impact brain function. And one example of this is that propionate can actually reduce appetite and is involved in that process. So it is interesting how these can act almost like hormones, and how they can affect different like sensations and communications and signaling in the body. So not only are gut microbes producing neurotransmitters and impacting mood there, producing short-chain fatty acids, which can also kind of alter brain function and kind of make communication signals off, they're also metabolizing bile acids and amino acids and produce other chemicals that can impact the brain. And so there's a lot going on here. And that this is where that gut microbiota, gut brain axis piece is really coming out, is that it might not just be the gut, it might be these microbes, and they're probably the key communicators on this gut side, or even on their own as like this third party that's impacting how all of these things are running and functioning, which is interesting. So another interesting connection here with the gut-brain communication pathway is this phenomenon called visceral hypersensitivity. So we see this most with IBS. It's one of the markers of IBS, but it is an issue with signaling and kind of nerve sensations and pain response. So what happens is whenever food is moving through your GI tract, your gut muscles are moving through peristalsis. Whenever food comes in, they stretch and then they contract. If you're expressing gas, that is expanding your GI tract within the wall. If you're bringing water into the gut through just an osmotic effect that some foods have, that's going to expand and stretch that gut wall. For most people, you may experience this sensation, you may notice it, but it probably doesn't feel like much, right? Most people aren't really noticing these sensations, even though they're happening all the time. For those with visceral hypersensitivity, these sensations, they signal through nerves. You have nerve endings everywhere in your body. Those are the signalers of like, okay, something's happened. There's a sensation going on, and it helps tell your body what to do in response. But those nerves can signal that sensation. They transmit that to the brain and say, hey, there's stuff moving, we're stretching. And what the brain does is it miscommunicates the response. So instead of the response being, some maybe small sensation that you feel, the brain actually communicates pain. And usually this is severe, significant pain. And that is visceral hypersensitivity. So you're more sensitive to those sensations. It's not that your sensations are more extreme always, but it's that you are more sensitive to the sensations. And this is something that we've seen as a response of potentially the like immune piece of how IBS is developed after foodborne illness. We've seen this from maybe like a signaling because of this altered gut-brain communication pathway and what's happening there, potentially this role of dysbiosis. Like there's a lot of questions here. As of recording this episode, I haven't found any clear research of exactly why this happens. And if you have, please share it with me. I would be happy to go deeper into that. But it is an interesting piece. So it's something that does highlight this gut-brain communication pathway and how this can be altered in those who are living with digestive disorders and certain conditions. Okay, so wrapping this up in terms of, does gut health impact mental health? Yes, it's not this perfectly cleanly tied bow that if you have an unhealthy gut, that you have mood disorders, or that if you have something going on with your brain, like your gut is altered. But there is this kind of complex weaving pattern and connection and relationship between both, where they may go hand in hand in a lot of people. Now, is it the chicken or the egg? Which one comes first? That isn't always known, because there's two sides of that coin, and likely the history itself is probably pretty complex. But if we can start peeling back some of those layers, we might be able to figure out maybe what the biggest trigger was to start. Honestly, it doesn't matter when it comes to treatment and strategies and how to address it. We want to make sure we're taking care of the health of both in order to get the results that you want. So yes, they're connected. So going beyond just mental health, I also want to talk about the connection to brain health, which is a little bit different. So less about mood and function, but about the actual health of the brain. The gut-brain axis is also connected through the immune system. And most of your immune cells are actually found in your gut. Think about gut-brain connection, your immune system is also connected, part of this. When the immune system is activated for a period of time, even in low levels of inflammation that we see in those states of increased gut permeability, this can lead to inflammation in the brain, which is one of the top causes of depression and Alzheimer's disease, as well as other neurodegenerative diseases. So what's fascinating is that there is almost, they call it the gut barrier, blood-brain barrier connection. Like that's probably what's happening. And the science behind it is a bit above me and what I understand fully. And so again, if you know even more, please comment and share. I would love to continue talking about this with others in this community and on the science side. But we do see this connection, which is fascinating. We also know that some bacteria in the gut, they can produce lipopolysaccharide, or LPS. This is a toxin that can actually cause inflammation if too much passes through the bloodstream. So more permeability. These bacteria, so these opportunistic bacteria are producing LPS. You've got this permeability. LPS is moving into the bloodstream. And this has been associated with brain disorders like depression, dementia, and schizophrenia. So it's very interesting. And this focus on LPS has been kind of higher recently. It's something I've been seeing a bit more in research. I think it's an interesting piece that maybe will be a part of the assessment of the gut and the brain in the future. So some other things that we want to think about and some things that we want to keep in mind with this whole gut health, mental health, brain health piece is that not only can your brain impact your gut directly and vice versa, but there can be a link to the symptoms that you're experiencing and how those impact your brain and your gut in a secondary and tertiary, third way fashion. So anxiety, a common issue that a lot of us deal with because of the world that we live in, work, whatever else may be going on. One of the symptoms of anxiety is actually nausea, which can also feel like an upset stomach and this overall like unwell feeling. And so for those who are, maybe have a history of digestion issues and a digestive disorder, this can spark skipping meals, going to safe meals, having that fear of what if, and these behaviors can further issues with the gut and digestion. So it might be that there's anxiety, there's stress, nausea, unwell feeling, leads to these behaviors. These behaviors cause more gut symptoms. Gut symptoms increase nausea, increase anxiety and stress, and you're back in that cycle in a secondary way. We also know that having digestive symptoms can lead to panic and anxiety and stress. Anyone who has dealt with digestive issues, even short term, if you've had even like a foodborne illness or a stomach virus or something like that, the stress and the panic and the anxiety that can come from that. And if you've had these experiences often, that actually creates some things in your brain, these pathways that when you have even the smallest amount of symptoms, your brain is triggered to believe that something bad is going to happen, and that panic and anxiety might be triggered even more. This can lead to feelings that are associated with mental health conditions. And then those feelings, like those responses, can then impact the gut. So again, back to that cycle that can be really difficult to get out of. So the good news, because that might feel like bad news, but it's not. It's interesting. The body is beautiful. It's incredible. And these connections tell us a lot about why things are happening in our bodies. And so the good news is that because the brain and the gut can impact one another so significantly, we can also impact both as we develop habits for both. And some of these habits, they do have that twofold effect, which is really beneficial. And what I've seen the most is really strong, clear routines that help the body function and help it get into a state of kind of homeostasis and ease. And that's going to come most from consistent, balanced meals, from movement, like consistent movement, stress management strategies, and nervous system regulation. And so when I'm talking about stress management, on the foundational level, that includes getting sleep, rest, setting boundaries, finding joy, and finding mindfulness in your day to day. So this is where meditation, hypnotherapy, like those things may come into play. But even these like therapies and these more kind of advanced techniques, they don't do as much if we don't have the baseline of sleep and mindfulness and joy and boundaries in our lives. So that is something that you can do that seems kind of simple in a way, but can impact the brain and the gut so much. And then when we talk about nervous system regulation, this goes hand in hand with stress management, but this is really about regulating that parasympathetic nervous system and sympathetic nervous system state. So the sympathetic nervous system state is your body's stress response. The opposite of that, it's a light switch, right? One can only be flipped at a time. The opposite is rest and digest mode. And that's where we want to live most of the time. But many of us live in the sympathetic nervous system state most of the time. So with nervous system regulation, some things that can help are breath work. This is something that can help like in the moment, a way to kind of take the body through that shift and that regulation. Exercise is key, and even completing stress cycles. And then taking breaks, like being really intentional about breaks. So a little bit like the stress management piece about self-care, this is the intentional slow down rest in addition to all of those other strategies. In addition to these things, the other pieces that can really help with both are diverse intakes of fibers to really help combat that dysbiosis effect in the gut, and eating enough, which is so basic sounding, and something that is very much underrated, I believe, when it comes to gut health and even mood and brain health, is just making sure that you're eating enough. Now, all of this can be done through one-to-one care with someone that you trust, a good health professional that's looking at all these pieces, like what we do at Gutivate, myself and my team of dietitians. So if you're interested in that, then there is a link in the show notes where you can schedule a consult. I would love to talk with you to see if we could help. But that is something that you want to be looking for. If you're working with anyone on your mood or your gut or all these pieces, it's like, okay, are we looking at this holistically and really thinking about strategies that we can use that are really going to make a difference? Not just the sexy strategies and the supplements and the fun things, but also the core foundational important things. We cannot overlook those, because that will help get out of this cycle and get into a place of kind of steadiness, which is what you want. So hope this was a helpful conversation. If you have any questions about this or you want to go deeper, please connect over on Instagram. I'm going to go deeper into this I've gone deeper throughout the whole week. And so if you have anything else that you want to add or go deeper on, please let me know, so that we can do that in that community.